Okay, thanks everybody for coming, and excited to see all of you, and would like to thank Joanne and the Nerman staff and team for making this such an amazing experience for me, such an easy install, and such a pleasure to work with everybody. The slideshow I prepared for you takes you through some of my work that I've done prior to the work that is on view here, and kind of will maybe help you give a context for the kind of work I've been making for the past. I've been at it for maybe around 20 years now, making and exhibiting work. But I think the work that began to be serious for me started around this time. This is one of the pieces. This is a drawing from that time. Where I took on the issue that seemed like it was pressing on me to take on, and that is the sense of displacement that I felt, and considering, as Joanne pointed out, my biography as being a person who left his homeland. This was something I needed to figure out how I felt about it and who I was in relationship to that. I was making that work for a couple years and got heavily involved in the kind of investigation of material as something that could embody ideas. So I was working with loaded materials such as ash from burnt books, salt, lead, gold, drawing and painting to sort of investigate these ideas related to the history of me and I guess my family, and the way it's intertwined with that of history of Soviet Union. This quote by a Polish poet and author, Czesław Miłosz, I find appropriate to, if not explain, but maybe somehow contextualize, how I think about being a displaced person, a person without a home, or a rootless person. He was also exiled from his homeland and worked all over the world, and not in Poland. So he lived elsewhere most of his life, but still wrote in Polish. So he had a relationship to that language. And that is, he, in this quote, you can see he sees an artist specifically as somebody who embodies this idea of being separated from the world, basically, but it's also, he parallels it with what a modern condition is, and that is that separation. I think having made that work that I was making about, that had to do with my biography, at the end I became fairly dissatisfied with somehow only being a person made up of those biographical facts and nothing else. And I felt like I'm putting myself into a kind of a box rather than freeing myself from it. And in response, I began to seek other ways of thinking and making work about things other than history or Holocaust or exile, even though, frankly, I think those things have remained somewhere on the bottom of my thinking, still in the periphery. I don't think they ever kind of have totally disappeared, but I'm not interested in them as directly as I was then. This is a show that I think of as a pivotal show for me, which took place at a space in Kansas City called City Ice Arts. That space no longer exists. And I made a series of paintings. They were all 5 by 6 feet. I made them in the back of Plug Projects back when it was at the in the West Bottoms, when we had studios there. And the reason I think of this work as pivotal, it's the work that allowed me to inquire into the nature of painting in a way that resulted in me gaining faith in painting, like realizing that painting is something that, well, I started thinking about it as a living object, really, as a living thing. and not just a picture, and not just material, and not just a kind of a thing through which to critically reflect on ideas. I began to really consider it as an organic thing. And since then, I think that has influenced the way I make work. And the way I look at work is I look for that sense of, I want the work to be alive and living and breathing. I don't have any, scientific methods by which I arrive to that feeling, rather than saying that that is what I'm asking for from the work. This is a little sentence I pulled from the artist statement for that show. But it was a pivotal show for me. From that point on, my investigation of painting, I think, turned to the landscape and figure in landscape as one of the sort of like main things, I guess, I have been painting since. And also, I would say that the show here at the Nerman that's up on view has felt to me as a kind of a conclusion of an arc that started then. That Threshold, the show Threshold, 11 years ago, was the beginning of something, and this is the end of something. And whatever comes next will be something else. In 2015, I received the award from the Charlotte Street Foundation. Before my wife was the director of it, by the way, I just want to mention that in case anybody's wondering. Totally honestly got it. And a show comes with the award. So they give you an award, and you're asked to have a show of the work that you made, in a sense, for the award, or with the award in mind now. And you get to exhibit it at a prestigious venue somewhere in town, like the Nerman or H&R Block, Art Space, or some other venue. And I thought, well, what kind of work do I want to make for it? And what kind of work have I not made yet? What kind of risk, I guess, do I want to take with this work? Because I did not want to continue making the same thing. And what was pressing on me at the time, I think I was 2015, I was a young parent. We just had our first kid in 2013. And being a parent of a young child, and also involved in having a spouse, I began to think about, well, these are the things that are happening in my life, and I want to paint about them, and I would like to find a way to doing it. And it, somehow felt risky, at least for me, to do it and take it on as a subject, because I did not see that as something people were painting about. And so I decided to try it, because again, it felt like a meaningful move. And so what came out of it were these large paintings. They were 6 by 7 feet. This is like sort of the biggest scale-wise work I've made. Following that, I got into the residency of the Studios Inc. and that in town here, and that's a 3-year residency. And again, they give you a large studio, amazing studio, and there is a stipulation that you will have a show at the end of the residency. And if you've been to the Studios Inc. gallery, you know the scale of that gallery. So I realized I need to be making work while I'm there that will somehow not be swallowed by that space. So it resulted in a body of work that I called Toward an Unknown Sky. And it is a work still that considers the landscape and a figure in the landscape, but landscape is here changed, and it's now a site, what I thought of as a journey, and the road was sort of the structure around which I organized the paintings. And the road, I understood the idea of the road as that of a dangerous place, as a place of uncertainty, the unknown, and discovery also. This is some of the work that came out of that show, or rather was in that show. And the work was still concerned with, I think, parenthood, the uncertainty of parenthood, also the danger of being a parent, and the all the uncertainties that role brings, and also the possibilities of it. Typically what I guess I try to ask of each time I make a body of work is that this body of work doesn't look, at least, or doesn't feel like the same thing that I just made. So I had an opportunity to exhibit at the Kansas City Public Library in downtown, and they have a really couple beautiful exhibition spaces. This was one of them, and for which I made an installation titled Kaleidoscope that consisted of, some of it was inkjet prints, photographic inkjets, and some of it was painted kind of abstraction. I wanted to take on the idea of, the feeling of time and trying to figure out a way of making work about it. So I wanted to create this sort of, this installation, I guess, that fractured the pictorial space and kind of maybe took on the idea of time almost as a calendar in it. This work is in the show here at the Nerman, and this was the oldest piece that started the series that ended up being the body of work that I'm presenting. All the work is fairly small compared to the other work I've been making, and I was really happy to be able to show it here because I think the space is good for the work. I mean, the work is small, and I wanted a packed feeling that the space is really kind of has a lot of work in it. So in it, there's 14 paintings, and one we ended up editing out. I think that this is the work on which I worked the longest of anything I've ever done, and not because each piece was so laborious, but essentially because I had nowhere to show it, and I just kept working on it, and it was just stayed around. And I've had these paintings around for 4 years. And it's interesting to have a relationship with a painting for this long. Usually, we have a deadline and the painting has to be released into the world and you have to get it done and move on. And with this work, there's a painting in there of a blooming tree with other things going on in it. And I saw that blooming tree 4 times, meaning 4 springs. I painted it in one spring because I saw it and it made an impression on me. And then I saw it 4 more springs. So each spring, I kept asking myself, well, is this how I want to paint this tree? So it's interesting to have this prolonged relationship with the work. I think I've changed it very much over the time that I was making it. And it's kind of a luxury to work on something for this long. I'll show you some of my influences that are maybe some of my heroes that have kept me company and have created a kind of a structure of accountability or something, I don't know how to call it, but that making art less lonely, or even making art possible, I think, for me. This is one of them, and I think this is my main influence in the past decade. And this is a living artist. His name is Enrique Martinez-Celaya, and I just discovered that the Nerman owns a watercolor of his. Is that right? That you bought? That's very cool. I hope to see it out soon. And he's an artist, but also not an artist, also a poet and a writer, and was a scientist, was trained as a physicist until he left the PhD program he was studying in to pursue art, because he felt the answers he wanted were in art and not in science. And for somebody like me, who is constantly uncertain and I think skeptical about the power of art to do anything at all, having a person like this and reading these thoughts and conversing with a person like that is very useful, because again, gives me a kind of hope for art and allows me to make my own. Agnes Martin is an influence on me, not because my work looks like hers or I like lines. has nothing to do with any of this. I'm interested in the way she lived her life, and I'm interested in what choices she made as an artist and as a person, and how these were interconnected and interrelated, and the way she turned her back on the art world and essentially left. And then the way she burned 20 years of her paintings because she didn't feel they were good enough. Yeah, so if you guys don't know Agnes Martin, the Nelson has a big painting of hers that they sometimes bring out, but she's worth looking into. Hilma af Klint, who was a Swedish mystic, she was an artist and a mystic, and anybody who's a mystic already interests me right away. But she was one, and she had voices speaking to her, conversing with her. She had visions of things, and she was instructed to paint, which she did in secret, and created a body of work that she bequested not to be exhibited for 20 years after she was dead. And only in the past few decades, really, has that work been coming out and made public. What interests me about Hilma af Klint's work, not that she's a pioneer of abstraction, though she is, but rather that what she was able to bring forward, and that is a kind of, using art as a way of maybe gaining deep knowledge into the nature of the world. So for me, again, it's not the way it looks, but rather the capacity this work has to reveal things. Anselm Kiefer was an early influence. He's a German artist, still living. And the reason he's an early influence for me is I think that he's taken on themes of German history and German history period when it was not very, it was not seen as an easy thing to do, right? He was German implicated in that history, and he took it on head on, where it was taboo essentially to do it. And I think as an artist, to do something like that is, I respect that very much. And I think that, I want to remember this as something that is possible to do. There's a painting in the show, in a way dedicated to Joseph Beuys, who was another German artist and a teacher of Anselm Kiefer. And it's a painting of which I titled after Beuys, really. But this is a performance that he did of washing feet of strangers. Joseph Beuys, if you don't know, was a German fighter pilot during the World War II, after which, when he returned from the war and survived it, became an artist and continued. And, I'm interested in that, in his pursuit of art, almost despite having that history or being who he is or having done these things, because it interests me, the inner ethics. What kind of person can make art, should make art? Can a bad person make art? What kind of art do they make? These kinds of questions interest me. And I think the case of Joseph Beuys is an interesting one. The Russian filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky is an old influence on me. And he's only made 7 or 8 films, and he died in exile because he was making films that the Soviet government did not see as something they approved of. So he died. I think he died in France or Italy. But I'm interested in his take on art, and his book, Sculpting in Time, that he wrote about filmmaking, is really influential. It's really a book about art and his ideas about art and what art is, and he saw it as a kind of a spiritual undertaking, was and still is a big influence on me. And then I have, in conclusion, a couple people that I've been thinking about a lot because they are, they are in my life. And these are songwriters, and I think it's interesting, particularly this one. Nick Cave is an interesting songwriter. I'm how he's taken on the themes of loss and grief and forgiveness in his life and makes art about it that is very layered and deep. I appreciate that. And I'm curious, I've been asking myself a question as to why, or can I make my work like that? Like, why can't a painter who is taking themselves seriously do the thing that a songwriter does? Why does it have to be about some other things? And so that's been an interesting question to ask. I think this is my last slide. I listen to Leonard Cohen all the time, and I read his poetry, and I'm interested in him as an artist and a person who was able to somehow weave together the sacred and the profane, because that's our condition. And I find him to be, a good teacher. I think importantly, Cohen, for me, has done a thing where he changed my attitude towards the viewer, where I don't think I have anything to teach the viewer or any wisdom to impart, or not. I don't see the viewer as somebody. I'm not better than the viewer of my work, and I'm not here to tell you something that you don't already know. And I don't think of the viewer as somebody who suffered less than me. So I think that came from Cohen. And that is my last slide. I'm happy to take questions if I can answer it. I may not be able to answer it. Yeah, which is my favorite excuse.
Okay, I heard in the introduction they said, what country?
Well, it was Russia.
Oh, no, you're in Russia.
Yeah, I'm a Russian.
Okay, there's 18 or 28
Right.
countries that make it up the Soviet Union. What area of Russia?
It's a central area along the Volga River, so
Okay.
sort of east of Moscow. And Kazan, where I grew up and lived till the age of 17, is a third largest city there.
Okay, I was just going to ask real quick. Now, do you consider yourself a Russian artist, a Kansas City artist,
Yeah.
an American artist?
I was wondering, should I tell the Nerman to say Russian born this year, or should it be American born this year?
Well,
It's a good question. I don't know.
I think it's a dramatic question that everybody needs to analyze to understand where your mind might be
Yeah,
grabbing ideas from.
right. I'm 46 now. I left when I was 17. So if you do the math, I'm less Russian than I used to be, and every year it's less so. So it's certainly there. Yeah, it's certainly there.
You said that this work is the conclusion of an arc, and mentioned what kind of risks do I want to take and what have I not made yet. I'm wondering, what are the risks that you want to take and what have you not made yet? Like, what do you have on, like, what you've had on your to-do list for years that you're only now, like, having the time to get to after completing several projects?
Yeah, I don't think it's like that you all of a sudden have time for something you want to do, and this was something I didn't want to do, that I was trying to get out of my way to get to that other thing. Yeah, I do think that there are things that work themselves out somehow, or you begin to understand some things that you no longer need to deal with them head on. And maybe there will be other pressures, but I do, we talk about it in our discussions in classes and whatnot, but I do listen to those parts of my heart which are on fire and go towards the pain is my attitude when making work. But what it is yet is to be determined.
Another question.
Hi, Misha. My question is related to the idea of displacement.
As you investigate displacement through your work, do you find comfort in that, and how does that affect future work?
Yeah, I think there is a sense of freedom and not having roots, and not having or giving up a language. I think there's freedom in that. Speaking in a language that isn't mine gives me freedom to be honest, because I think otherwise I'm too rooted in the conventions of the language. So I swear a lot because of this, because I can, and it's fun. Does it give you, so there are benefits of displacement that I think as an artist I've embraced. I realize that I want my identity to remain fluid, where I can just become whatever I want to become. And there's a sense of freedom in that. But I do think that, it comes with a little bit of a price. The sense of displacement is a price you pay. And it is kind of an endless, this is why the tyrants send out, they exile people, because it's one of the, it's one of the biggest pains. So it is a type of torture, but it also comes with freedom. So I'm okay with it.
Misha, congratulations on the show.
Thank you.
Can you talk a bit about your process in arriving at the imagery in these paintings? Do you make studies? Do you make sketches? Do you know what you're going to put on the canvas before you start painting it? Do you discover things in the process of painting?
Yeah. All of the above. Sometimes it happens in the process of painting something and finding something else, and sometimes things come ready-made. Yeah, sometimes things arrive sort of prepared in a way, and sometimes they've changed over time that I decide to modify it in this particular way, or after seeing it for a couple of years the same way, last minute I modify it. So it's all of the above. Things trigger me, I would say. I'm like triggered by things, not in a bad way, not like, but I do get triggered by certain things. And when I do, I pay attention to that and I start like thinking, why is that? And then what can I do here about it in terms of work? So again, I run towards the painful things and not away from them. I don't do it like, it's not a heroic act or anything like that. But that's what I just do, yeah.
Tell me a little more about how you view your relationship to the viewer. You talked about Leonard Cohen and not thinking you have something to tell them, but what is that? How do you articulate
I have something
that
to say,
relationship?
but not something to teach. And I think there's a difference. That the viewer, again, I'll repeat what I say because I believe in that. I think of the viewer as somebody who maybe suffered more than me, who knows more than me, much more intelligent than me, more talented than me, all of the things. So if I account for that, if that is that kind of viewer, what do I have to give them? And that's what I paint.
I liked your slide about the title for the one exhibit named Kaleidoscope. For the exhibit that's currently here, who came up with that name, why, and how?
I came up with that name after being made fun of by my wife for all the other names that I've come up with, that rightfully so. I can't name things. They all sound terrible and cheesy and like an Enigma song. and I need to have help. But I came up with that name. And why did you say why I came up with that name?
Why and how?
Well, I'm interested in the idea of the things glowing with meaning, right? A kind of a mystical experience that you don't know why things are meaning something, but they are generating meaning. And the given relates to the factual, that which is. So I just figured I'll put those two together. And my wife didn't make fun of me, and I said, this is the one.
Hey, Misha. So just since we're at Johnson County Community College, I just wanted to ask you about how you, since you are a teacher, how does that play into your studio practice, or fight against your studio practice, or stop your studio practice, or et cetera?
I've been a teacher for now a long time, and it's only been good. You know, no matter where I've taught, whether I was here or somewhere else, I think you do come in contact with people that renew your, I don't know, hope or something in things. And also, yeah, I mean, certainly it is time invested, but, you know, teaching pays for my art, essentially, you know. It pays for my studio practice to have something like that. But also, yeah, it's very useful to do it because as an artist, I think it's useful to do it. Why is it useful? I had reasons. I knew there were reasons why it's useful. I can't think of them now. Well, because again, you're doing things you're afraid others will laugh at. Like if I have to give a demo and I don't know what the hell I'm doing, that's a scary moment. And I have to learn to do that thing, right? And then that affects the thing that you do in the studio. You get better, basically, at art by teaching it. Yeah. There's yes. I do.
Could you talk a little more about your decision to make the paintings smaller? I'm really curious about how artists decide what scale they want to work at.
Mm-hmm. I should be talking about why I wanted to make the paintings bigger in the first place. Maybe, right? I think a large painting creates a different kind of space, and a small work is not something I've made before. So it's, again, an opportunity to maybe explore a thing that I'm not very comfortable at. So that would be one. Two, you know, practical things, spatial limitations, you know? So all that comes together, and you have a situation where you ask yourself, what kind of work? I'm not going to stop making work, but what work can I make? And this was the scale in which I could work, and I had the space to do it in, and I proceeded. Yeah. So there isn't really, I mean, it changes the work. It does change the scale, will change the work. So it's not really, I don't know how much of a choice I've made. There were pressures, and I sort of just worked with those pressures, saying what kind of work can I make that would align with its scale. That's really how I went about it. Yeah. Nothing glamorous here.
Do we have time?
Yeah, and after this question, I'd love to see all of you out there, and I will be happy to talk more in person, one-on-one.
Do you think that since you're from Russia, that has helped you become a better painter, or like?
Or a worse painter? What did it do for you?
Versus if you were like born from here, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I did enter art school really early, at the age of 12. So I don't know. And I didn't want to be an artist, to be honest with you. My mother made me draw every summer because I refused to draw. And that was our homework. So, yeah, I was uncertain about it, I think, until I realized that it's basically saving my life in a way, that being an artist and being around people like that and doing it is a life-saving enterprise in a way. Yeah, so then I committed. Yeah, so I don't know if it helped me or not, being from a place, you know, but it didn't hurt. And also, I think being an immigrant and being an artist, you do have to fight more with your family about it. So you have to make a stance. Yep.
I got one more.
Okay.
All right.
If you weren't a painter, what else would you be?
Good one. What would I be? I think early on I tried to think, well, I could be a jeweler. Weirdly, I was reading books on rocks as a kid, like pretending, making stuff. I don't know what I would be. I would have a little antique store on State Line Road somewhere, which Leon would consign his junk to me, and I would sell it. I don't know what I would be. It's a good question, though. Yeah. There's not options, friend. It just is. Okay, thanks everybody for coming.